Hey there. Well, today, as I'm recording this, I don't know when you see it, when the date will be, but as I'm recording this, today's date is August the 23rd, which means, of course, September 23rd is 1 month away from today. What's the significance of September 23rd? Well, if you've been on YouTube or Googled it or went on Yahoo or any other search engine and looked it up, you will see there's quite a bit of significance to the date September 23rd, 2017, especially amongst so-called prophecy experts. They see all kinds of significance to that date. Not specifically the date, but something that's going to happen on that date. That, according to who you read about it, it's something that only happens every 7,000 years or whatever the number is. That's what it's supposed to be. And what they're seeing in this is, I'm not going to go into what all they have to say on it, but what they say on it, what you'll hear from them, is about the signs in the heavens, of the stars that are there, the constellations that are there, and has something to do with the constellation Virgo, or I think that's what it is, the Virgin, with the planets Jupiter and whatever else are going to be there at this time. That's going to be perfectly aligned. Like I said, I haven't read all of this, so if you want to read theirs, you can see what all it says and so forth, and you can see what they make out of it as far as the how they interpret that. But the reason it's created such a stir is because of the prediction mode that people have gone into as far as predicting things about this particular date of September 23rd, 2017. And it goes primarily, when you read them discussing things in the Bible, dealing with it, you'll read primarily that they are pointing to Revelation chapter 12. There's some other things as well. Jesus' account that you'll see signs in the heavens and so forth in Matthew. But primarily for this one, because it's specific, what they're seeing is something in Revelation chapter 12. So I want to read that to you from Revelation chapter 12 to get what it is that they are claiming. So this is Revelation chapter 12, beginning with verse 1. And I'm reading from the New King James Version. It says, "Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her 1,260 days. Okay, so that's Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6. Now, this idea, they talk about this, what's happening in the heavens, with the constellations, as I said, with the Virgo and so forth. And it says this woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet, and and on her head a garland of 12 stars. And they talk about what all you'll see with the constellations and so forth. And she's being, verse 2, the woman being with child, she cried out in labor and pain to give birth. I think that's supposed to be Jupiter, who's the king planet, and the one she's given birth to is the one who's going to rule the nations, verse 5, with a rod of iron. Her child was caught up to God and his throne. Okay, so here's what they are seeing in that. They say that this will be, or at least a good number of the ones that you're reading, and this is why I'm talking about this, is they see this being the rapture of the church. in Revelation chapter 12. And when we see these things happening up there, that's a sign to us that that is the time. This was the sign because it says that a great sign appeared in heaven. And so they said, well, this is the sign. It's appearing in heaven, and it only appears once every 7,000 years or whatever the time is that they say on that. So they say, when it says in verse 5, the last part, and her child was caught up to God and his throne, that this is a reference to the rapture of the church. Now, this assumes, by the way, several things. One, it assumes a futurist understanding of Revelation. Two, it understands there to be a future tribulation period of probably of 7 years, but at least 3.5 years, but maybe 7 years, depending on who you're listening to. But I say probably of 7 years. And it assumes a rapture, a pre-trib rapture, before that tribulation. That's hence why it's called the pre-trib or pre-tribulation rapture. In other words, that God is going to take the church out before this tribulation period. That is a view typically, as I said, we refer to it as the pre-tribulational rapture view, or pre-trib for short, also the dispensational viewpoint. Now, it assumes all these things to be true. Now, my point here is not to argue whether those things are or are not true. I do agree on some things. I don't agree on other things. Just for the purpose of clarity, I do not believe in a pre-trib rapture. However, that's not relevant for understanding why this is false, why their idea that this prophecy here refers to something that's going to happen on September 23rd, or some are saying within a few weeks of September 23rd, sometime very shortly thereafter, a month or two thereafter. Why that is not, why this, what regardless of what happens that day, regardless of what your view is on eschatology, why, based on this verse, that cannot be true. It's very simple, really, why that can't be true. And it's because when it says, and her child was caught up to God and his throne, that assumes her child to be the church. Well, so that's what I have to assume. There's another assumption, I said, with all the other ones I made, there's another assumption on this, and that is that this child, this male child, as it says in verse 5, she bore this male child and assumes that to be the church. Well, I want to look at how other commentators, how other interpreters, Bible teachers have seen this. I've got some here. Now, for the purposes of what I'm doing here, I wanted to get people, Bible teachers, who agree with their particular interpretation of the end time events in general. In other words, the futurist view of Revelation, a future 7-year tribulation period, and the church being raptured out of the tribulation period prior to its beginning. Okay? In other words, people who hold to a pre-tribulational rapture. Now, the first one I have is in this book here, The Believer's Study Bible, edited by W.A. Criswell. W.A. Criswell was the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Dallas for many years before his death. And the associate editor, or I think he's called the managing editor of this Bible, I can open the page here, is Paige Patterson. Paige Patterson is the president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, today. Was one of Criswell's disciples, if you want to call him that, one of his proteges. But they were the main driving forces behind this particular study Bible. So I want to turn, and they both hold to a pre-tribulation rapture and future tribulation period and so forth and so on. Now I want to turn, this is if you have that particular Bible, it's on page 1816, and what they have to say of the study note on Revelation 12, 1 through 5. It says, the woman clothed with the sun cannot be the church. Christ gave birth to the church, Christ gave birth to the church, not the church to Christ. So that explains why the woman there can't be the church. It says the 12 stars upon her head are certain indications that she should be identified as Israel. The child which she delivers, get this, the child which she delivers is the Christ, not the church. The woman is not the church, as I say, it's Israel, but the child is not the church. The child is Christ. That the dragon who drew a third of the stars, probably a reference to angelic host from heaven, is Satan. It says, thus a panorama of messianic history from the birth and the ascension of Jesus to the 3.5 years of persecution of the nation of Israel is revealed. Okay, that gets into that futuristic idea. But the important point here is he says the child is the Christ. The child is not the church. So this child, who it says in verse 5, according to them, Patterson, Criswell, the child that was called up to God and his throne is a reference to the ascension of Christ, not the rapture of the church before the tribulation, which they believe in. Now, here's another one. This is the Bible Knowledge Commentary. This is put out by the faculty of Dallas Theological Seminary, and also in Dallas, Texas, but unrelated to Patterson and Criswell, because it's not they're not Southern Baptists, but they hold identical views as far as eschatology. And this particular, it's written by faculty members. It's all the New Testament. But the book of Revelation is written by John Walvoord, who was the chancellor of the seminary and a professor of New Testament there as well. He died some years ago. He wrote several books about eschatology. He was definitely a pre-trib rapture believer. And this is what he says on this in verse 5. It says, when the child, this is his commentary here on verse 5 and 6. It says, when the child, described as a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, was born, he was snatched up to God and to his throne. The child, obviously, notice his word, the child obviously is Jesus Christ. Alford, another writer, he says, states that the man-child is the Lord Jesus Christ and none other. The catching up of the child refers to the ascension, not to the later rapture of the church, though the same word for snatched up is used of the rapture, and he quotes 1 Thessalonians, he mentioned it. He says the rapture of the church would not constitute a deliverance of the man-child from Satan. So here we have, as I say, another believer, Walvoord, in the pre-trib rapture, who says this does not, the man-child does not refer to the church. It refers to Jesus Christ. And the last one I want to read to you is, this is the MacArthur Study Bible. John MacArthur is the pastor of Grace Community Church in Panorama City, California, and he's the president of Master's College and Seminary, also a dispensationalist, also hold to the pre-trib rapture. He disagrees with these others on some issues, but on eschatology, they're in perfect agreement. He says this about the male child in his commentary in his study Bible on verse 5. It says, a male child. He says, Jesus Christ in his incarnation was of Jewish descent. Despite Satan's efforts to destroy Israel and the Messianic line, Jesus' birth took place as predicted by the prophets. He says the rod of iron describes Jesus' coronation as king over the nations of the world. And he says her child was called up to God. He says on that, Christ's ascension is in view. So we have three different people, or four if you include Patterson and Criswell's one there. One, you have W.A. Criswell, Paige Patterson, John Walvoord, and John MacArthur, all of whom held to a pre-trib rapture, or hold, a couple of them are still alive, two of them have passed away, all of whom hold or held to a pre-trib rapture, all of whom believe everything I said at the beginning. They hold to a futurist view of Revelation, they hold to a future 7-year tribulation, and, as I just mentioned, to a rapture of the church before the tribulation, all of whom, in their commentary on Revelation chapter 12, verse 5, hold that the man-child is Jesus Christ, not the church. So unless you believe that Jesus is going to be ascended to heaven on that day, this verse has nothing to do with what's going to happen on September 23rd in the constellations, if these gentlemen are correct. And I don't agree with them on everything, but on this, they, I think, are right. And most every other commentator, even that doesn't agree with them, holds the same thing, that the man-child refers to Jesus Christ. So whenever you see these various things on YouTube or the internet about some great fulfillment of this verse on September 23rd, they're wrong. Thank you for watching.